Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and my channel is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. And today I'm joined by somebody who definitely cares about machine learning and other people. I don't know where you would put language technology on your personal ranking of things you really like, but Jordan Harrod. Hi, Jordan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And I think it's something I'm definitely interested in. It's also a field that is increasingly hard to keep up with, as everything else is these days.
Yes, yeah, I would definitely agree, particularly as we get a lot more multimodal and cross-field stuff just happening to us. Yeah, so a little bit about Jordan for those of you who don't know her, and I hope a lot of you actually already do. Jordan is probably one of my favorite machine learning YouTubers. I know I complain a lot about machine learning YouTube being, listen, there's a lot of content out there that is very sensationalist and a lot of content out there that is very wrong, like factually incorrect. And I think Jordan's a great example of someone doing SciComm in this space in a very, responsible way. So I'm very pleased that you made time to speak with me today.
Of course, and thank you. I feel like try very, very hard not to fall into, I feel like, the trap that a lot of people who do science communication often fall into, which is either it's usually the hype trap.
Yep.
And I try to not fall into that while also not being like 100% doom and gloom the entire time.
Yes. Yeah, it's important to, hopefully if you're in the field, it's because you think that it has the potential to be and do good. So yeah, also sometimes be a little bit of a struggle.
Yes.
So I have just like a number of things that I think that would be very relevant for stuff that I talk about on my channel all the time and I know are relevant to your interests. So just right off the bat, I know that you've worked in science policy advocacy previously. And for those of you who are not aware, right now we are really starting to see a lot of momentum in legislation around, machine learning and AI systems, a bunch of court cases. There's some Supreme Court cases right now that are going to be influential. Let's put it that way. We've got, the EU AI Act just was proposed. The Digital Services Act just went into effect in the EU. We were seeing a lot of really great privacy rulings actually from South America. So it is a very fast moving time. And what I thought would be a good place to sort of kick off the conversation is to talk about, so as a scientist, I didn't actually say what you do. I said that you're a great science communicator, but Jordan is also currently a Ph.D. student at MIT in neurology. Am I wrong about the department?
So I'm a PhD candidate at a joint Harvard-MIT program in medical engineering and medical physics.
So slightly wrong. Yes, apologies about that. And then obviously in your research and your coursework, you've had a big focus on machine learning as well. Yeah. So as a scientist, and I think a lot of my viewers are technical practitioners and engineers working in this field, what can we do, right? Like, how can we advise policymakers, and what does that process look like, and what are some things to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I got into science policy in undergrad during my senior year. I had a professor in my department, Dr. Chris Schaefer, who was very involved in policy advocacy in physics on the Hill. So he'd be down in DC once a month. And he teaches a class called Science Policy Boot Camp, where the idea is kind of to take scientists and throw them into the deep end for things like this. You pick your own topic. I can't even remember what we picked 5 years ago. Wow. But it was machine learning related. And you have to do everything from, interviewing different stakeholders to get a lay of the field, reading existing either draft legislation or current legislation, and then creating white papers, drafting memos, and then learning how to kind of communicate and defend the policy proposals that you're looking for your representatives to ideally draft into law. And so I think when it comes to making moves in the policy world, the first thing that comes to mind for me as a skill that's super important is science communication, because especially if you're talking to staffers, if you're talking to people, if you happen to actually talk to your representative, which is rare, often it's a 5 to 10 minute meeting. They're going to take the spark notes of what you told them, and potentially use that or give it to their boss. And so you can't like walk in with a super technical approach because they just won't get it. And they'll kind of like nod and smile really politely at you. And then when you leave, they will probably not do anything with that information. So I think going in with a very clear ask is super important. I think that's usually the thing that when we go to DC, so I used to be part of MIT's Graduate Student Council External Affairs Board, which went down to DC 2 or 3 times a year for grad student related policy advocacy. And so usually we prepped beforehand and had basically bullet points of things we wanted to make sure that we got across in every single meeting. So that would be something that I definitely keep in mind when it comes to policy advocacy. Now, you don't have to go down to DC in order to do policy advocacy. I get that like most people, A, are not going to do that and B, just don't have time. You can call congressional offices, you can call local and state offices. There's been like tons of local legislation that has passed in like, especially in Massachusetts, around like the use of surveillance technology by law enforcement. So like there are options for you to get stuff through at a local level, and it can often be a little bit easier because the people at the local level tend to be a little bit more accessible since they're working with a much smaller group of people and are often able to push things through a little bit easier than in somewhere like Congress. So yeah, I think both of those are good. Anything involving highlighting things on social media. I see public engagement and like science communication work as a form of policy advocacy in a lot of ways, because in talking to the general public, in educating the general public about whether it be language models or something else happening in machine learning or something else happening in the broader science policy world, they can then go to their representatives and like blow up their phones and, you know, call and say, I want XYZ, or they can ask questions of their representatives at things like town halls. And so that can also be another great way of creating momentum around potential policy ideas that relate to whatever science policy topic you happen to be interested in.
I think those are 2 really great takeaways. First being, get the right level of abstraction for your intended audience, know that they have limited attention and that literally everyone wants to talk to them and has information to give them and things to ask of them. And second, really thinking local. So I would say, I know that even some city, I don't know if any counties have passed a particularly like biometric ordinances or anything, but they're certainly the ones who help decide like what police departments spend money on.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of the ShotSpotter stuff right now is going on in Detroit at city council meetings. So a lot of folks have been protesting the use of this technology.
Yeah. And then you can also, like, if you get stuff like that passed at like the local level, then often it ends up kind of trickling up to the state because everyone who's in the policy sphere at the local level is talking about it and it makes its way there. If you can get it at the state, you can get it to trickle into Congress. Like it coming at it from a local perspective is often a faster way to make change, but also a way to kind of get the ball rolling on wider changes.
Yeah. And show that there's appetite for this type of legislation and sort of the general populace as well. So I think this dovetails really nicely into the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So a lot of, particularly the White House's AI Bill of Rights that came out this week. One of the things that they talk a lot about is fairness and anti-discrimination measures, which is a huge topic in machine learning and one that I know that you worked on quite a bit. Yeah, so do you want to talk a little bit about your work on it and then maybe some recommendations for people who are just getting into it about maybe readings or resources or stuff you'd recommend?
Yeah, so how did I get into this field? I started working in machine learning after my junior year of college. I was doing a summer research program at Stanford, and I was looking at MRI reconstruction. And when I got back to Cornell, where I did my undergrad, I actually happened to be like an RA for my dorm, and one of my other RAs is Red Abebe, who's now over at Berkeley doing amazing things. Yes. So I think she kind of like accidentally pulled me into this because that was my introduction to the field. So for me, it was interesting in that I feel like I came in like, I came in starting by reading like papers that Red had published, papers that like Deb Raji had published, papers that Timnet and people like them have published. And so that was my understanding of like the landscape of fairness work. And then I started branching out further into like reading more about medical AI and also like looking at, conferences like NeurIPS or like ICML. And it was like, oh, this like everyone isn't reading these papers.
No, you
I thought that
started in the good place. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that this was like where we all were at with this kind of work, because that was the foundation of what I learned. And so when I got to grad school, I was interested in kind of ECS for medicine broadly, and ended up working in a couple different labs where I got to work with like split neural networks. So can you develop like privacy preserving systems for transmitting health information across mostly edge computing systems? And can you find ways of doing that like actually work on people's iPhones and stuff like that? And it was definitely very interesting to see how much of that work did not necessarily consider fairness. And I think that partially it was because a lot of that work was very focused on getting a basic proof of concept out so you could put it up on archive, which you have to start somewhere, but also there were other ramifications of that work that I thought might be more interesting, and also somewhat ties into the policy sphere of like, what do our data sets look like in this kind of research? Does that affect the fidelity of information transfer within the system? Does that affect our predictive outcomes for these types of systems? If we're also looking at, it was a differential privacy based project, so does that factor into things? And then kind of like more broadly questions of like, well, we're designing this system to make it easier for people to be able to get their medical images analyzed by some central model, and then that model will also learn from the images, but who has access to a smartphone that can help to provide us with data in order to train this model? Is that group of people representative of like the entire population? No, probably not. So I kind of got in on that project, and then ended up moving towards like brain machine interface brain stimulation work, as well as looking at developing novel, ideally non-invasive brain stimulation systems using like inverse model design and finite element modeling. And so that was a lot of fun for a lot of reasons. One of them being that like in a lot of modeling that we do for brain stimulation, there's like a pretty standard set of head models that we use in order to, figure out like where do you put electrodes in order to reach XYZ part of the brain.
And just to clarify for people listening, this is stimulation with a T, like zapping it to cause effects, and not simulation, like on the cognitive modeling side, because in this context, it could have been either.
Yes, well, I did both. I do both. So I do brain stimulation, and then I also do simulations of brain stimulation. Yeah. So yeah, one of the things that I was really interested kind of going into that project was all the assumptions that go into these models. So one of the big ones is like when you see these models, they are, fully bald heads. There's like no hair. And we already know that EEG systems are not optimized to work on people with like natural hair, which is like what I have. The fidelity of the signal tends to be a lot worse. And there are people doing a lot of interesting work on developing EEG systems that we can use in people with like curly hair. But because of that, a lot of the EEG data that we have is not necessarily representative of everyone, and it's what everyone uses to build models or make assumptions and about how other neurological systems work. So that was something I was really interested in. I was also just interested in the fact that, the shape of your skull is different, and the thickness of the bone in your skull is different, and the thickness of like there are all of these parameters that we kind of assume in a lot of the brain stimulation literature that aren't constant.
Assume your skull is a sphere instead of the cow being a sphere.
Kinda, yeah. And so a lot of what I was interested from the modeling perspective is like, well, there's the complexity of how do we take our current understanding of E&M biophysics and use that to generate novel stimulation paradigms. But there's then also the challenge of how do you incorporate the complexity and range of what people might look like under these systems and make sure that they still work. And so that's some of the ongoing work that I still do for my PhD, and is kind of how I've indirectly inserted fairness work into my grad work. And then the other way is just through like the YouTube channel. It's a field that I love learning about. I started the channel originally as a way to make sure that I kind of still had ties to things that were currently happening in machine learning, because I knew going into grad school that I was like interested in ECS for medicine, but I had no idea what specifically I wanted to work on, and I didn't know if I'd still be working with machine learning. And so the channel was something that I kind of started as a way to still like pursue curious questions that I had, even if it wasn't directly pertinent to my research at the time. And so that's definitely something that has come up in videos. It's been super interesting to learn about. It's also always interesting to see how people respond to it in the comment section. But it's been very fun, and has definitely been something that when I think people come to me and ask about like, getting into the field, but also like interesting things that are happening in the field, a lot of what I end up pointing to tends to be kind of in the fairness realm, as well as in the like interdisciplinary fairness related research realm. So not looking at necessarily fairness work that is like fully grounded in ML, but looking at people who are doing the interdisciplinary thing between like ML and economics, or other existing like theories that we can then apply to this, that people historically have maybe tried to apply without necessarily understanding, having the grounding in the actual field that the thing came from.
Yeah, I think that's something as someone who comes from linguistics has been sometimes a source of frustration for me. I would say if folks are interested in, conferences or publication venues or just general disciplinary hubs for this kind of thought, HCI work will often be genuinely interdisciplinary. That's human-computer interaction. And then another good area to look into is socio-technical systems, or STS, which considers the whole system, you'll be shocked to learn, within its social context, as you might have guessed from the name. So the next thing I did want to touch on a little bit is that you've been very open about having ADHD and also how that affects your life as a graduate student and as a researcher. And something that I talk about quite a bit on my channel as well is that I'm also neurodivergent. I have dyslexia. And part of what drew me to language technology in the first place was that it let me graduate high school, which is great. Big fan of having graduated high school. Definitely made my life better in a lot of concrete ways. Not that that's, not that everyone has to go to high school, or I'm saying the people who didn't, are in any way lesser, but it was good for me and I'm glad that I did. Yeah, so I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that. And there's sort of 2 points I'd really love if you could touch on. The first being, what accommodations have you made for yourself in your day-to-day life to make your work easier? And then secondly, what are sort of general thoughts on technology helping accessibility in general for folks who are neurodivergent? Because again, I talk a lot about dyslexia, but I don't talk as much about ADHD. So.
Yeah, so I guess I should start by saying that I got diagnosed with ADHD right before the pandemic started in 2020. So I was 23, I'm currently 26. So it wasn't something that I consciously factored into like my K through 12 education, my college years, early grad school. And it was definitely, I think, helpful to have both a name for the things that I was experiencing that I've always experienced, but also to realize that like that thing that feels like it's really hard for you to do, that it seems like it's really easy for everyone else to do, it is actually harder for you to do it. It's not just, there isn't something that you're missing about getting that thing done. It's that your brain actually works differently from other people's, or at least from neurotypical people. So that was helpful. I think that In terms of accommodations, the pandemic was both a help and a hindrance in a lot of ways. I think that before the pandemic, I was working full-time in lab on campus. These days, I tend to work hybrid. And so on one hand, a lot of the strategies that I set up for myself to help me get work done tended to be based on external motivation or external accountability. And I think that that can be helpful when it comes to, you go into lab because you know that if you're around a bunch of other people who are working, you'll be more inclined to work. But I also think that it led to a lot of burnout in the sense of like, if you pack your schedule with a million things, then you will always have that last minute adrenaline to get work done, because otherwise you have like time blindness and deadlines are not a thing until they're here. And so I think that I had routines set up that basically kind of kept me like running on a treadmill all of the time, which forced me to get work done consistently, but also meant that like every month or two, I like fell off the treadmill and was exhausted for like 2 weeks before I could get back to doing anything. And both in terms of getting diagnosed, but also in terms of switching to working from home, I had to create a fully new routine from scratch, fully new structures, support systems. I learned about a lot of tools that I could use. And so I think these days I tend to do a hybrid kind of situation. I go into lab when I need to, and then I'll work from home. Otherwise, I have a standing desk, which helps me a lot because I can just like fidget and move up and down. There's also a treadmill behind me. It's a desk treadmill. Oh, nice. So I can walk on the treadmill, which also helps me focus. But I also just have a decent amount of control over my schedule, which I think helps a lot, which I know that not everybody has, because it means that like if I have 4 meetings in the morning and my executive function is like completely shot, I don't have to immediately get back to work in the afternoon. I can like go for a walk around Boston and then like come back and get some work done. And I think that level of accommodation has been really helpful for me, just being able to kind of work with my brain, with my energy levels as needed. I did take medication for a while. I was on stimulants, and I think they would have been helpful in high school because I think they would have helped me manage better in a school system or an educational format that was not working for me. Like, I think it would have helped me pay more attention in class and like make it through like 8 hours of class every day straight through and get my homework done, not at the last minute, or not stuff it in the bottom of my backpack and then forget about it. But I think the main reason, there were 2 reasons why I stopped taking medication. One was because it was causing insomnia. And it turns out that my depression gets worse with insomnia. So we just took me off of that. But I think the other reason was that I didn't need to fit into that educational format. And so it was a lot easier for me to just construct a life without having to worry about taking meds and just manage my energy myself. In terms of interesting technologies, I actually just saw an article in Wired, I think this morning, about a video game that you can prescribe to children for ADHD that helps with like executive function and attention management. I've been hearing about similar projects for a couple of years now, and I think that that's super interesting. I think that that could be really cool. I need to dig a little bit more into like their actual clinical trial to see like what outcomes they were looking at. There's also like VR work in terms of mindfulness training, which also is supposed to help with executive function. There have been studies that have shown that. And then trying to think of like other things in like the ML world that are helpful, or that I find helpful and interesting for like ND people. But I don't know that there's that many. I feel like so many of the things that I talk about on the channel are systems where I'm concerned about how ND people might be impacted by them. So like when
any of the anti-cheating proctoring software.
Yeah. That was basically what came to mind. I did a video on that like very early in the pandemic that accidentally blew up because everyone was trying to figure out how you cheat on the like exams. So that was all of the search terms. And it's like, that's not what this video is about, but I mean, you watched it, so.
There's been some recent work suggesting that it is actually quite easy to cheat. So all of the privacy violations did not result in no cheating, which, that's great.
Yeah.
Love that.
Like, it didn't work and it was ableist. Cool. So yeah, stuff like that. Stuff like, I did a more recent video on like Google's surveillance system that schools are installing on school issued devices and how they're trying to use it to detect things like cyberbullying and mental health crises, and how they're also often, like, the schools are also often not like alerting students and parents that like, this thing is tracking everything that you type on this laptop. Cool, just so you know. So if you say something that you didn't mean for, your school principal to find out, then sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there has been some interesting like tech broadly, I think, that has come out that can be helpful to ND people. But at least for ADHD, I think a lot of the stuff that I see in particular in the educational system, I'm like, oh no, don't do that.
Yeah, EdTech is kind of bleak right now. But, I mean, especially given, current movement on legislation, I think it may look very different in a couple of years, and hopefully in a good way that stops spying on kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Knock on wood and call your congressperson.
Yes.
The two things you can do. I was fortunate enough in graduate school, I was in the linguistics program, and one of the things I was able to do was study American Sign Language with some of the deaf faculty at the University of Washington, and really learn about sign linguistics and be able to sort of be in a lot of spaces with CRIP activists and disability rights organizers. And yeah, I learned a lot about technology blind spots around disabled folks and accessibility, and they are many and very damaging and really harm people's quality of life and independence. So yeah, definitely something to keep in mind in general, particularly with automated systems.
Yeah. Plus, I feel like a lot of the accessibility tech that at least has like come through my various feeds, the main criticism that always comes up is that they were not developed with people who are disabled or who have accessibility concerns, and like, they're your whole user base. That's the whole point. So they don't work because you didn't ask the people who need to use them if they work. So hopefully there'll also just be a lot more engagement on that front to involve, and hopefully people will be able to potentially develop systems themselves that are accessibility related that help them make their way through the world, but also hopefully the world becomes more friendly to people who are differently abled, people who are not able-bodied.
Yes, able-bodied, able-mind.
Yes.
Yeah, I think a lot about particularly folks with, aphasia and apraxia as more and more systems become voice activated as the default. And I mean, obviously there's also other disorders that make using the voice very difficult, but those are the two that I really think about. Or, speaking of neurodivergence, people who are nonverbal at various points in their lives that are not super predictable. Anyway, we're getting on the sort of the bummer trail again.
Yep.
Yes.
That's always the problem with this thing. It's like, it's very easy. I think at one point there were comments on my videos where they were like, can you make a video that's like happier? And I was like, yeah.
I don't know. Could the community get its stuff together? Yeah. Yeah. So I think that brings me to my next point, which is, so obviously, you're actively doing research. You're, part of doing research is talking to your peers in your research community. And also you do science communication, right? So you're used to talking to both the public and also, experts in the field. And I was wondering if you could sort of succinctly, it doesn't have to be succinct.
I was about to say succinct is not something I'm good at with ADHD, but I can try.
Or at least like start with the highlights, and then we can drill down a little bit deeper if we want to. Talk about what do you do differently when you're talking to someone in the field and somebody out of the field. So to link it back to something we talked about earlier, you're talking to your legislator, probably they don't have a degree in machine learning. So how do you get to the point where you can have, conversations where they feel included and informed without misleading them? And, how do you change, what do you change from when you're talking to technical peers?
I feel like both come down to common ground in a lot of ways when it comes to talking to people who don't have technical backgrounds and this kind of stuff, especially if I'm approaching it from a science communication or like a policy perspective. I'll usually try to find the aspect of that topic that would be interesting to them or that they have personal stake in. And for policy, you can often rely on like constituents as opposed to like them personally, which makes things a little bit easier depending on the policy positions of that particular person. But I think for general science communication, I mean, a lot of my channel is based around like, how does this affect you? Like, how would this, if you were to encounter this system, what would it mean for like you as an individual person? Not necessarily like, what would it look like on a societal level if we deployed a system like this to people that you don't necessarily relate to, that you don't necessarily feel like you have things in common with. So that's usually how I approach it for people who don't have technical backgrounds. And then if I'm talking to people in my field, I would say I think it does come down to common ground somewhat. I mean, if we're just talking about like interesting research or something like that, then we figure out what areas of research are interesting to both of us and we talk about it. If the goal is to like help someone be more interested in incorporating like fairness into their work or something like that, then I'll probably focus a little bit more on, you know, how it can do something like bolster your career or other people who are doing really interesting work in this field that person might follow or look up to or something like that. I think at that point it's, in most of these cases, unless I'm having like a coffee shop chat with somebody who's just generally interested in the topic and that's the personal benefit that they get from it, a lot of it comes down to appealing to what people are interested in and what they're kind of going for at an individual level, and ideally using that as the common ground that you can then be like, it would be, you know, there's a NeurIPS workshop that's accepting submissions on XYZ topic, and I see that you do something related to that, so it'd be cool if someone did work that connected those two things. Could be you.
Maybe.
Not saying it is. Maybe. I don't know. That was not concise.
Oh, no, I think it was plenty concise. Yeah, I particularly when I'm talking about, you know, I'm going to specifically talk about like access and, you know, equal ability of a system to handle people from a range of different backgrounds. Because of course, you know, fairness, accountability, transparency covers a lot of different things. But like for that specific facet of it, particularly if I'm talking to someone who is in a commercial context, something that I'll often bring up is like, hey, if your system isn't work great for, let's say, people over the age of 50, that's a lot of customers. They're not going to give you money if your product doesn't work for them. So maybe if you were more inclusive, you could tell your bosses your sales would be better.
To pay you.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that you didn't use these words, but that's sort of what I'm interpreting from it, is there's almost like a storytelling aspect to science communication, right? Setting the scene, having somebody have like a vivid imagining of the thing that you are talking about and using that imagining to help them build their mental understanding and scaffolding around the topic. Yeah,
and to help them like contextualize it within their own story. I think within the science communication community on YouTube, the term scientific storytelling has become a bit of a like hot topic. People are not necessarily for it because I think, similar to what we talked about at the top, some people will lean a little bit too far into the story and forget a little bit of the science. And I think that that's something that we've seen a bit of an increase in lately. So there's been a little bit of like kerfuffle around that particular topic. But I do think that a lot of what I do on the channel in policy work, in talking to people about science stuff, is storytelling.
Yeah, and you can storytell without being sensationalist and without hiding the fact that there is ambiguity and nuance. You just don't necessarily want to, you know, immediately start with telling everybody all the edge cases.
Yeah, it's probably like scientific clickbait would probably be a better term for the thing that people are concerned about. But yeah. Well,
we are starting to come towards the end of our time together, and I know you are very busy, so I don't want to go over schedule. But I always like to ask people whenever I'm interviewing them. Usually, I ask them what their favorite piece of language technology is. But I think it probably makes more sense to ask you just sort of generally, what's your favorite application of machine learning, right? What's something that you either use or like, or are just delighted by knowing it's around?
I kind of have two answers. So there's like a very practical answer, which is, this is not sponsored, this is not a plug. There's a platform called Descript.
Descript, yeah.
Yes, it's especially for people who are not interested in doing heavy editing on videos. It's a great way to be able to edit your videos fairly quickly and also generate captions and edit them in real time and then export everything at the same time. And you now have like non-YouTube generated captions that actually make sense, and you've edited a video and it makes your life a lot easier. So that's something that I use in my workflow pretty consistently.
And just for background for people who may not be familiar with it, the sort of editing flow with Descript is you upload video that has speech in it, and then it creates a transcription that's time aligned, and you can edit the video by editing the transcription, right? So you could remove disfluencies, or you could, drag text around and it'll change the video. Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to make sure people knew what we were talking about.
And if you're, usually this works better if you're purely using audio. So if you're like podcasting, not if you're using video, but they also have voice cloning. So if you misspeak at some point, you can go back in and basically type in, I meant to say this, and it will sound mostly like your voice. It still has a bit of the uncanny valley feel to it, but it's for little things that you want to change, it can be pretty helpful. In terms of things, I'm thinking of like things that are more for fun. I think I have been having a lot of fun with like Dolly, Midjourney, like the AI art sphere. It's been super interesting to just play with those systems and see what they generate. I know there's also issues associated with them. Yeah. But purely from a like I'm in multiple group chats where it's just people like generating, these super cool looking artistic pieces. And it's been really interesting to see. I think it's been more interesting actually to see the prompts that my friends come up with than necessarily the images themselves, and what a prompt ends up resulting in, because there's some prompts where someone posts an image in the group chat and we're like, what could you possibly have put in to get that? And then they tell us what it is and we're like, how did you come up with that? That's like, that's not a phrase that I think has ever existed in the English language before right now. And so I think that's just been very fun to play with en masse.
I think it is a fun toy is kind of the best thing about those systems. So
yep. Yeah. Because then within the same conversation, we also start getting into like, well, like the data set that underlies this is not great, and also there's like copyright concerns, and well.
Yeah, speaking of legislation and things that might come up, so question mark on what IP law is going to look like in, I don't know, a year. I think it's
Getty already announced that they were like, we're not doing this because it's too, nope. It's too risky. It's not worth the liability. So that, I think, anything involving IP and AI, I'm like super interested in seeing where it goes, because it's such a fascinating field right now.
And also just very practically code licensing, right? Like code generation is a thing. It's here. People are using it. We know that these models memorize. Yep. If you are using memorized code, is it covered under the original license, right? Is it copyrightable at all? Question mark.
Exactly.
Well, okay, you've built something entirely using generated code. Who owns that?
Yep.
Question mark.
Who knows? The law currently doesn't.
No. My sort of general recommendation for people interested in using generated code at work is maybe not in projects you really care about and that are really critical for the continued existence of your business. It's just my 2 cents. That's what I would do.
For fun. For funsies, sure. For something that needs to be around for a while, that might become proprietary technology. Maybe don't do it.
Plus, of course, there's also the, some of the risks involved, right? Like typo squatting, you could introduce, vulnerabilities. There's issues around older versions that have been security patched being generated, particularly as we get farther and farther from the point in time in which a lot of this code was written.
Yep.
So Yeah, again, it's like all these image generation problems. It's kind of cool, it's kind of fun, but I think it has limited commercial actual applications.
Yeah. There's also, I don't know, when it comes to like code generation, as someone who like did a CS minor, there's also just the part of me that's like, you should like know how your code works. Like you should know what you wrote, and you can't do that with code generation, which also just makes debugging anything a nightmare. I feel like you should just write your own code and it's fine. But that's me.
Yeah, it's a brave new world. And I think we'll
yes, it is.
Definitely see how these things play out, and hopefully they play out in a way where a lot of people don't get hurt very badly. That's always my
hopefully.
You know, I wake up every morning and I'm like, be great if a lot of people didn't get hurt very badly today. That's my hope. So that's all the sort of main points I want to talk about today. Definitely a lot to think about and a lot of interesting topics. And before we wrap up, first of all, where can people find you? And then second of all, do you have anything you want to plug?
You can find me at Jordan Harrod on pretty much every platform these days. And at the moment, I don't have anything to plug. At the moment, I'm just trying to get through my thesis proposal redefense since I switched dissertation projects. I have to do the defense over.
I cannot imagine doing that twice. Godspeed.
It'll be fine. Our proposal defenses are usually pretty casual, but it does mean that I have to like write up a whole 20-page thing and make a presentation and wrangle my committee, and it's a good time.
And hopefully you're not having to start your lit review from scratch. That was far and away the most draining part of my dissertation.
Luckily, I have a lot of the background info already, so it's just a matter of writing it.
Well, that's good. I mean, still a lot of work, so I'll let you get back to it. But thank you so much for joining me today, Jordan. And she's not going to pitch it, but I will. Go subscribe to Jordan. See her cool videos when they come out. They are very good. I recommend them.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining. This was a lot of fun. And thank you for everybody for tuning in, watching, listening, and I will talk to y'all later.